Geek Therapy Radio.
Well, now tell me, darling, may I have a talk with you? Oh, tell me, darling, may I have a talk with you? Because it won't be long before our true love will be through. Oh, tell me, darling, am I right or am I wrong? I said, tell me, darling, am I right or am I wrong? I'm determined to know, little girl, you coming home. Come on home, baby.
Howdy, partners. Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio. I don't know why I do what I do sometimes. And that's a sentiment I know that my wife can agree with 100%. But yeah, welcome to Geek Therapy Radio Podcast. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. The first thing I wanted to tell you right off of the bat, because I was reminded of this watching an LGR video. Had LGR on the last podcast, by the way, so if you haven't heard it yet, go back and listen to it. I think it's at 25 minutes and 13 seconds or thereabouts. Chapters, I know, work for some podcast players and not for others. I put chapters in, especially recently, I've been putting chapters in my podcast uploads so that if you have a podcast player that takes advantage of chapters, you have that available to you. I realize that not every podcast player has chapters, so I will try to remember to timestamp things. I was really good at timestamping, but I'll keep that up. So anyways, watching an LGR video where he's tinkering with his Raspberry Pi 4. He has this new aluminum or steel case, whatever that case is made out of, and he's just tinkering around with his Raspberry Pi 4. Raspberry Pi 4s are amazing for tinkering, just for flat out tinkering. I don't know of many people who use a Raspberry Pi 4 as a daily driver computer. Maybe if all they do is type, maybe if all they do is use Office software, you can possibly use a Raspberry Pi as your daily driver. But for me, who needs a little bit more software compatibility, especially with video editing and audio editing. And while yes, Reaper is awesome on Raspberry Pi and especially on Raspberry Pi 4, Raspberry Pi 4 isn't 100% there yet for me. There are major advancements on Windows on ARM for Raspberry Pi 4. There's always advancements in Android on Raspberry Pi. Raspberry Pi OS is constantly getting better. Ubuntu on Raspberry Pi. Linux, Mate on Raspberry Pi. There's all sorts of distributions, all sorts of operating systems for the Raspberry Pi, and it gets better and better and better and better and better every single day. It's perfect for tinkering and retro console emulation. And that's what I wanted to tell you today, remind you right off the bat here on the podcast. I have been tinkering around with an operating system that thus far has become my favorite operating system for the Raspberry Pi 4. And I would probably say also for the Raspberry Pi 3, although I have not personally played around with this operating system on the Pi 3, that is Twister OS. Sorry for beating around the bush so much. Twister OS is amazing, and in my opinion, the best operating system on the Raspberry Pi 4 right now, and I'll tell you why. On the Raspberry Pi Zero, my favorite operating system is Laka, or RetroPie. I basically just use the Raspberry Pi Zero for retro emulation, 8-bit and some 16-bit emulation. Definitely overclocked the Raspberry Pi Zero. But Twister OS on the Raspberry Pi 4, it used to be, and maybe there have been other OS distros that could perform this function, but Twister OS is really great for you're in the desktop environment, you're in the Linux desktop environment, and let's say you want to run a Game Boy emulator. Well, with other operating systems on Raspberry Pi, especially Raspberry Pi OS, that means you'd have to reboot the device and have multiple images on your SD card or your solid-state drive and boot into individual images as you wanted. So let's say you're in Raspberry Pi OS and you want to play Super Nintendo games. It would mean you'd have to reboot out of Raspberry Pi OS and then choose to boot into RetroPie or choose to boot into Laka or whatever your chosen RetroArch thing is. Could just be RetroArch. But with Twister OS, it's all built into the operating system, or it's much more seamless switching. But so, for instance, RetroPie is built into Twister OS. So if you want to play a Game Boy game, you just double click on RetroPie, and you're in RetroPie. And one of the things I tested with this, because I know I'm not the only one who likes to do this, is I like to put on a podcast or a YouTube video and just listen to the audio in the background while I game, while I play emulators, or while I work. But especially while I play emulators. So I did this test. I put on Cinema at the Cinema with Tim Heidecker and Greg Turkington, for all my Tim heads and Greg heads out there. And I just love to listen to the episodes in the background while I play video games. So I put on season 6, episode 7 or whatever, and minimized YouTube just to run in the background. And then I double clicked on RetroPie. Again, this is all in Twister OS. Double clicked on RetroPie, went into RetroPie playing Game Boy games and Super Nintendo games while the audio from YouTube is still coming out through the speakers. It was glorious. Absolutely glorious. So I cannot recommend Twister OS. Also, it comes bundled with, and this is all free, by the way, of course. It comes bundled when the operating system DOSBox comes bundled in there. Well, what's the x86 emulator? It's not Wine. It's not Wine that comes bundled. It's what's the other one? I think it's called 86 something, 86 box or whatever. I haven't tinkered too much around with it. DOSBox runs amazingly. So you run DOSBox and you can boot up Windows 3.1, Windows 95. You can be running Doom 1, Doom 2, all those DOS games, most of the DOS games under DOSBox. In Twister OS, it is glorious. There's a Super Nintendo emulator that comes baked into the operating system. It's wonderful. With Twister OS, you do not have to shut down or reboot your system to boot into another operating system. You don't have to shut down and reboot into RetroPie. You can just open RetroPie in Twister OS, and then you can close RetroPie and you're back on the desktop of Twister OS. It's glorious, and I'm telling you that what happened, because there's a lot of us who tinker with Raspberry Pis. We get heavy into it for a week or so, a couple weeks, and then we put it away for several months. It collects dust. Because what winds up happening, I can only speak for myself, what winds up happening is we take our Raspberry Pis as far as they'll go for that time period. And then we hit this brick wall of, and I speak for myself, I always get back into Raspberry Pi because I'm looking for it to be a desktop replacement. If I can do most of my computing needs on a Raspberry Pi 4, I would love just to turn on my Raspberry Pi 4 and pull 14 or 15 or 20 watts out of the wall, whatever it takes, instead of pulling 600 watts out of the wall to use my main workstation PC. But I always come to this roadblock, and it's that Raspberry Pi, as great as it is and all that it can do, and it gets better and better and better, I always reach the roadblock of it's not enough. It's not quite enough to meet my daily needs. And that's fine. The Raspberry Pi, like I mentioned, is just for tinkering with. So if you haven't, I'm saying, those of you who haven't played around with your Raspberry Pi recently, blow off the dust, get it out of the drawer, flash an image of Twister OS onto your SD card, load it up into your Raspberry Pi 3 or 4 or even 2, and take Twister OS out for a spin. I don't believe Twister OS is bootable in Berry Boot. Berry Boot images have to be of a certain type, on the Berry server, but I don't think Twister OS is bootable in Berry Boot yet. But regardless, it runs great on an SD card, and for a lot of people who only use Berry Boot to dual boot from Raspberry Pi OS to Raspberry Pi OS to RetroPie to Laka to whatever, with Twister OS you don't need that. Just put Twister OS on your card and boot into Twister OS by itself, and you have all those emulators available to you. It is great. It's worth digging out your Raspberry Pi if you haven't played with it in a while, if you haven't tinkered with it in a while. Booting up an image of Twister OS and be off to the races. It is glorious. All right, so that's it on the Raspberry Pi update as of right now. The next announcement I have to make is I'm very happy to say this, that I've finally uploaded, for those of you who are subscribed to the YouTube channel, I've been uploading videos maybe once, probably once every week and a half on average. I've been uploading podcast or something. I haven't been able to in the past several weeks, past few months, been able to really focus on making dedicated videos the way that I like to make dedicated videos. Purpose-built, scripted, going out and shooting a bunch of dedicated footage for dedicated video. But I've been able to upload one just today. As I'm recording right now, I'm looking over to my laptop, processing. Oh, it says finished processing. So by the time you listen to this podcast, I will have a brand new, dedicated, purpose-built video up on my YouTube channel about its label. What is the label for? What's the title? Is the DeLorean DMC-12 actually unreliable? So it's a video, 11 or 12 minutes long or so. What is this? 12 minutes and 13 seconds long, where I basically go over the DeLorean and old cars and whether or not the DeLorean is reliable or not. Those of you who've seen the 8-Bit Guy video where I had that catastrophic coolant leak, that's what spurred the idea for this video. So I've finally been able to finish the video. I started shooting footage for the video a couple months ago. I started shooting footage for the video in May when the 8-Bit Guy and I did his video. So I finally got it all edited today, rendered today, and as of recording the podcast right now, it is finished processing. All I have to do is reach over and hit publish. When you're done listening to this podcast, you can go to my YouTube channel, just Geek Therapy Radio on YouTube, and watch that video. It's very fun. I take you on a ride along in the DeLorean. Lots of fancy, fun drone shots. I'm pretty proud of this video. It's a really fun one. I show you how I replaced that hose that failed on the 8-Bit Guy video. How it, just not to give away too many spoilers, that it was a very cheap hose and a very quick fix. And I was back on the road. But I also did a few other things to the car while I was at it, and I will leave that for the video for you to discover. But it's a very fun video, taking a ride along in the DeLorean, talking about the DeLorean, talking about old cars, and talking about, again, not to give away too many spoilers, that our culture these days is pretty much trained into the planned obsolescence, that we are not expected to be able to fix our own devices anymore. Louis Rossmann. I know a lot of you listening right now know who Louis Rossmann is in New York City, and his constant battle with Apple, his constant middle fingers and FUs to Apple because they build their products in a way that they're never designed for the end user to be able to fix their own laptop. The right to fix debate. Right to fix legislation. I've talked about this. I've been talking about it since the inception of Geek Therapy Radio. I brought it up from time to time. This right to fix legislation that basically would take the power out of the manufacturer's hands. That, hey, when you buy a laptop, let's say from Apple, and you have the wherewithal to fix it, it shouldn't void any warranty, and it should be well within your rights to fix your own devices. When you buy it, you own it. You should be able to do whatever you want with it. You shouldn't have to take it to a dedicated retailer or repair shop that only Apple approves to fix your Apple device. So when we buy products, and it's not just Apple, it's anything, Samsung, smartphones, anything these days, your car these days, they're not designed for you to be able to fix anything in there. Whereas old cars like the DeLorean and any other vintage automobile is designed, yes, for the owner, whoever buys it, to be able to fix it. You used to be able to go into, I'm not this old, but you used to be able to go into convenience stores and grocery stores just on your corner and buy car parts. It used to be that you would literally walk into a convenience store and buy a can of pop for a nickel and then a timing belt for your car. The Fiat 500 is one of the most famous models of cars for this. The old vintage Fiat 500s, they were designed from the ground up to be serviced by the person who buys the car. So you would go get milk at the corner shop and be able to get spark plugs for your Fiat 500, body panels for your Fiat 500, an engine right next to the candy bars for your Fiat 500. because a lot of people who bought Fiat 500s back in those days lived in very rural areas where they didn't have mechanics everywhere. So Fiat decided that, well, since they can't drive 100 miles to the mechanic, especially if their car's broken, let's make this car easy to work on themselves and have parts just in every convenience store around the countryside so that they're never left stranded. Those days are long gone. Long gone. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but I checked my email and I have the brake switch waiting for me in the mailbox for my 2010 Audi S5, which I know it's 10 years old, but it's still considered a very modern car. It's all freaking computerized. There's virtually nothing in that car that Audi, Volkswagen decided me, the customer, the consumer, had any business in fixing. It's all sensors and computers. There's very few things on it that I can service myself. It's designed that way. It's designed for when something goes wrong, that you take it to the dealership. So I'm hoping that this $30 brake switch is the root of all my problems. I know I beat this dead horse, but the brake switch is waiting for me at home. I'll let you know tomorrow whether or not the brake switch fixed my problem. And I'm hoping and I'm praying and I'm crossing my fingers that is all it is. That's the sensor that's throwing the code that's preventing me from driving my car. It just doesn't even crank, doesn't turn over. New battery, new starter, nothing has fixed this. I'm hoping that it's just this brake switch. I mean, I got the new starter several months ago and it's been running like a freaking champion up until this new issue. So I'm hoping that it's just the brake switch. We'll see. Because if it's not the brake switch, and I'm managing my expectations that when I go home tonight and put in this new brake switch and the car still doesn't work, I'm managing my expectations to expect that. I'm expecting that it still won't work. The next step is putting it up on ramps and inspecting the wiring between the starter and the whole starter circuit and just see if there's something there I missed, if there's a rotten cable somewhere. I have checked every... You know what? We're not gonna get into it. I'm just hoping, because it's such a complicated modern vehicle, that this brake switch fixes it. It's funny. It just popped into my head. I didn't mention any of this in the video, what I'm about to say, that the brake switch was giving me fits in the DeLorean recently. A few months ago, I forgot about this. The brake lights weren't coming on, or they were coming on intermittently. I would hold my foot down on the brake pedal, and then like a few seconds later, the brake lights would come on. I have updated the tail lights in the DeLorean. Most of the lights in the DeLorean, now they're all LED. They are glorious. It's awesome. But the brake switch was making it so the brake lights wouldn't come on. It's like a delayed on, and that's not good in traffic. If I slam on the brakes in the car, I want the brake lights to come on instantly. So I fixed that issue in about 5 minutes. I crawled into the famous fix the DeLorean position where I'm climbing underneath and I'm putting my feet over the back of the seat, and it's a very dignified position. But I just got in there with electrical cleaner, just some spray electrical cleaner, and I just kind of was jiggling the switch and back and forth, loosening it all up, and then spraying the electrical contact cleaner in there. I unplugged the terminals from the two terminals wires from the switch itself and reseated them and pulled them off, put them on, pull them off, put it on, spraying it with electrical contacts. It just took a little bit of cleaning, 5 minutes in and out, and the brake switch works perfectly. I fixed that issue with the DeLorean in 5 minutes, and there's so many little things like that would cripple a modern car, that would cripple a modern Audi, but in an old DeLorean or an old Volkswagen Beetle or whatever old car, you diagnose it quickly and you can fix it quickly. It's super easy. The old cars are from an era designed with the consumer in mind, the customer in mind, and it's just wonderful. I love old cars for that reason. Yes, old cars, you need to stay on top of them because old parts are old parts and they will wear out. They will require maintenance. But that said, when they do require maintenance, most old cars are an absolute breeze to work on and fix and easy to diagnose. That's not an all-encompassing statement. That's not an umbrella statement about every old car. I cannot imagine that changing the timing chain or the timing belt in a Ferrari 308 would be easy. there's a lot of Ferraris where if you need to change the timing chain, it's a $30,000 job. Even if you do it, well, I'm not sure if you do it yourself, it would be $30,000. I'm sure the timing chain in a Ferrari isn't cheap. The DeLorean, it's just a timing belt, just a serpentine belt, and that thing costs a couple bucks, and you pop it on in 2 minutes. It's super easy. So there are old cars that are very finicky and are very hard to work on. I don't think you could pay me enough money to do work on a Lamborghini Countach myself. It's an old car, but a gigantic V12 in an Italian sports car. First of all, I'd be too scared to work on it. I'd be too scared that if I touched my pinky to the Lamborghini Countach, that it would crumble to the ground and it'd be all my fault. I'm not saying they're not that resilient, but Italian sports cars and reliability don't necessarily go hand in hand. I can only speak to the reliability of what I know, and that is the DeLorean. I've had a couple of old Beetles that were stupid simple to work on. My mechanic one time, you can look this up. Look it up on YouTube. It's like a time to start the stopwatch time challenges and removing the engine from old Volkswagen Beetles. There's four bolts that hold the engine in to a Volkswagen Beetle. 1, 2, 3, 4. My mechanic said you could put a blindfold on him and put him in a dark room on a moonless night, and he could remove a Volkswagen Beetle engine in less than 30 minutes. And there are people out there that can remove Volkswagen Beetle engines in less than 60 seconds. It's incredible. They're so easy to work on. I wish modern cars were that easy to work on. I've mentioned that changing the starter in my car in Rowdy is a $1,500 job at least. Now, there are modern cars where the starter is still easily accessible. You can take out the starter and bring it to AutoZone and check it and get a new starter at AutoZone and blah, blah, blah. But just saying, each car is different. By and large, a lot of old cars, most old cars, are much easier to work on than modern cars. And that's all I'll say about that for now. If you want to watch the video, it's uploaded right now on the Geek Therapy Radio YouTube page. It's a very, very fun video. Go check it out. Moving on, we'll start wrapping this up soon. In a surprise to nobody, the Webb Space Telescope launch is delayed again to late 2021. But they say we have high confidence in that date. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. We are more than 10 years past scheduled launch of the James Webb Space Telescope. And it's now officially delayed 7 more months. It doesn't make any friggin' difference anymore. We don't even need to see these updates anymore. I care deeply about the James Webb Space Telescope. I think it's going to be one of the coolest things humanity has ever done. But I don't care about getting updates on delays anymore. It's just the next thing I want to see about the James Webb Space Telescope in the year 2030 is that we've finally launched it, that it's on the launch pad. And I will not believe it's up in space until it starts taking pictures. That is how little confidence I have in the launch of the James Webb Space Telescope. Now, I don't mean to say that to demean any of the work that the engineers are doing at all. To say it's beyond my capability is an understatement of the century. I don't have a clue what those engineers are doing. But I don't care about these updates in new delays. I just assume it's going to be delayed. The next thing I want to see about the James Webb Space Telescope is that it's launched. And I don't have high hopes. I don't have high hopes for that anytime in the near future. We're not going to see it launched in 2021. I'll bet $1. I'll be conservative right now. I'll bet $1 that we are not going to see the James Webb Space Telescope launched anytime in the year 2021. Don't think so. I think monkeys will learn how to speak English out of their mouths and butts before we see the James Webb Space Telescope launched within the next year or any time in the year 2021. And that's all I got to say about that. Tesla stock. Well, I won't talk about that. I will say, as an actual last thought, that I have started, and this will be the actual last thought, because you can see the time of the podcast down there. You see we're nearing the end. I have started to clean up disk space on my laptop, at least, to make room for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. As we all know, as I've mentioned on the podcast, it's going to take up at least 150 gigabytes of storage space. So I've begun that process to make sure that I have room on my laptop for 150 bytes. What elegant coding that would be. I've started making room for 150 gigabytes free on my laptop, and I want it to be free on my NVMe drive because I want that-ish loading as fast as humanly possible. So I'm checking my drive C right now, my 1 terabyte NVMe drive I have on my laptop, and I have 439 gigabytes free on my laptop to put Microsoft Flight Simulator on my main boot drive. I've got that 2.5-inch storage drive that's also solid state. It's nowhere near as fast as NVMe. SATA can't have a hope or prayer of being as fast as NVMe. So my C drive, which is the NVMe drive where Flight Simulator 2020 is going to go, is looking pretty at 439 gigabytes free. Now I've got to go home at some point and make room on my Ryzen 9 3900X PC, workstation, desktop PC, to make room for that. I don't have an NVMe drive in there. It's PCI Express 4.0. I don't have an NVMe drive in there yet. I'm probably going to put, at some time in the near future, a 2 terabyte. Well, let's see. At least a 1 terabyte PCI Express 4.0 NVMe drive into the 3900X, because the X570 motherboard and the 3900X supports Gen 4, PCIe Express Gen 4. And why wouldn't I take advantage of that? I'm just debating 2 terabyte PCIe 4.0 or get 2 1 terabyte NVMe 4.0 drives. Because I would use one of them as a scratch disk for video editing and audio editing. And then I would use just a 2.5-inch solid state drive for all my renders to render to, all my exports and all the bulk storage. So that the main drive, the boot drive, is running my video editor, for instance. Then I have the other 1 terabyte NVMe PCI Express 4.0 drive with all the footage that I'm editing. And then I'll have the 2.5-inch solid state drive where the final exports of the videos go. So that each individual drive is doing its own thing. There's no overlap, which is the ideal setup for video editing and any sort of audio editing. There is some debate there. Some would say that, dude, when you're dealing with PCI Express 4.0 and an NVMe drive that'll read and write at like 5,000 megabytes per second, it has just the 4K and flops and IOPS and all sorts of stuff just out of this world, that you really only need one drive. Just get the 2 terabyte NVMe PCI Express 4.0 drive and just do it all. Have the software on that drive, have your video clips on that drive, and then just render right to the drive itself at the same time. It's so fast that it doesn't even matter. I understand that, but in my mind, I want to keep them separated. I want to keep the drives. I want OS and software in one drive. I want my bulk raw audio and video on another drive, and then I want my exports and renders going out to a third drive. That's just how I want to keep it in my head. I do have a 2 terabyte traditional hard drive in there for just, really, it's just for the bulk Steam storage. It's just for bulk games that I don't play too often. So Project Cars, BeamNG. I mean, I play them, but not often enough. BeamNG. I'm going to stop the podcast here because I could just go off on BeamNG for a while. I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for listening to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast today. It's been a very productive day. Video coming out, new podcast coming out. I've got to reach out to Neil right after I get off the air, quote unquote, here and see if he's still everything's still clear for tomorrow, our interview with Retro Man Cave. So I'm going to do that right when I get off here. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of giving and receiving love, and you are worthy of your own self-confidence. We are all geeks about something, so please, for the love of God, for the love of Gaben, for the love of Kraken, whatever, please know that you are worthy of love and you are worthy of your own self-confidence. Embrace your inner geek. Lean into your geek thing. Share your geek thing with others, because we're all we got right now. We're all we got in a lot of situations. Just take care of yourselves and others, and I will see you tomorrow. And by tomorrow, I mean the next podcast upload, which is probably going to be Sunday night. Okay, bye.